Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back for some more EVE Online. Welcome back also to Jagdaw, the largest trade hub in EVE Online. So today's video is going to be a market video, and I want to take a look at the tech tree ships and the subsystems, and this for two reasons. Number one, this was a bit of a request. A couple of you guys have been requesting that I take a look at the subsystems markets, and for the ship markets themselves, I'm pretty interested in what's happening there, because over the last couple of months in EVE Talk, I'm clearly seeing that these markets are behaving very differently from about a year ago. So let's dive in. Let's go to my own quick bar where we have all of the tech tree ships, and let's start with the destroyers. So we get Confessor, Hecate, Jagdaw, and the Zwepel, which about a year ago I would say had a very nice and predictable market that would function, in my opinion, very logically. So once a ship would go up in price, perhaps on not enough supply, you would see supply start to focus on that one ship, which would then give a little bit of breathing room to the other ships, that perhaps some of them are too low. Those prices would start to go up, the first ship would go back down, and you would have that nice predictability that allowed us to get a couple of trades going here and there, because we could notice oversupplies that would then build up to lower prices and those buy opportunities, and then the other ships would pick up the slack, and then we would eventually get our sell opportunity. So let's start here, for instance, with the Confessor, which has a chart where I would put the average price for around 45 million. You can see the daily averages at around 100, or definitely below 100 a day, and you get a couple of big volume spikes that also have price responses. Starts the year at 45 million, and the high points, yeah, 55 plus are possible on a couple of occasions. At the moment, this Confessor is selling for 48 million, and the buyers are coming in at 43.5 million. I'd put that right on the yearly average, so we just recovered a little bit from a low period that I think I called as potentially a buy opportunity for the Confessor, because a lot of the others are actually very expensive. Let's take a look at the first one of these, is the Hecate. You see that yeah, we start here at 50 million ISK, but we spent most of that first part here between 45 and 50 million ISK. But then we have a very strong late summer where we spent a lot of time above 50 million ISK, and right now the Hecate is actually doing a crazy run up in price to a one-year high point, and actually looks like it touched 69 million on the chart. It's selling for 68 million ISK, buyers coming in at 55.6 million ISK, so super expensive and not even on big volumes. But what I do think you should remember here is that drop right at the start of the year down to that 45 million, which most of the, in my opinion, popular tactical destroyers had as a average price range. But at the moment, the Hecate, of course, and for the last 6 months or so, the Hecate has been way more expensive, spending most of that time well above 50 million ISK, which a year ago I would have said that should draw in a lot of supply to bring that price back down to, let's say, the Confessor price, right? That went down to below 45 million here, but you can see it has way more staying power here. Next up, we've got the Jagdaw that has an even different chart, although that start is right where it should be, 45 million ISK. Some volatility, like a run up here that then does crash back down, and eventually we actually get an oversupply point here in July, but then it's unstoppable, and we again spend most of the last half year above 50 million ISK for the Jagdaw, which is very expensive, and we're still paying 55.5 million for the sellers, 47.5 million for the buyers. So I would also put the Jagdaw at way more expensive than around a year ago. For the final destroyer, we've got the Zwepel that again started around 45 million and has that run up, pretty stable year, and then counter to both the Hecate and the Jagdaw, which were selling for above 50 million ISK for that late summer period, that fall period. The Zwepel is actually below 45 million and dives to a one-year low point when all these others are showing these crazy prices. And that is this thing that to me has definitely changed in this tactical destroyer market. Before we had way more responsiveness, and here I think for months on end I said I think we should be buying Zwepels. I think they're really cheap, and eventually we should be running out of them because people should be producing Hecates and Jagdaws at these current prices. But no, we kept you know, staying flat, and then eventually going down below 40 million ISK, and then finally we got a little bit of breathing room, and so then we went up above 45 million. There was definitely a trade that we noticed here, but it took months and months for that one to actually materialize compared to before, where it was way more predictable and faster as well. And to show that, we're gonna focus a little bit on this first part of the chart. So you can see at the start of the year we start below 45 million, and then we actually had a run up to 55 million for this Zwepel in pretty short order. That normalized on 45. That feels quite nice. We have the same thing pretty much for the Confessor, a little bit slower on the normalization, but again starts below 45 million, runs up to 55, and then normalizes. And then the one that it was responding to is right here. Here is that Hecate that starts the year well above 50 million ISK. That's way more expensive. And what happens here is the Hecate starts to draw in supply because you're selling them at such a better price than the other tactical destroyers, that eventually starts to bring that price back down towards that 45 million that is normal. But in order to make this happen, the market had to stop producing so many Confessors, had to stop producing so many Zwepels, and these made those prices go up. And this was super nice. You had very tradable charts, you had very predictable price points where, all right, here we're seeing too much supply, we're seeing below average prices, let's start buying. And then on another ship we're seeing this is really starting to be a pretty high price. We should start to see more and more ships get driven into that market, and then eventually that price starts to go down as well. And that was exactly what was happening. And you know, I would say probably the year before this, it was very much in that pattern where these four tactical destroyers would communicate very nicely with each other, and that is completely gone, because here throughout this summer you can see that we maintained these very expensive prices, and then our super cheap Zwepel just never went anywhere. Kind of strange. That's the destroyers. I'm not sure exactly what the reason for this is, but yeah, it's a situation. If any of you guys, by the way, have speculation as to why these markets are behaving so differently, I would love to hear it. Next up, let's take a look at the cruisers. Here is the Legion. That has a price spike in December because of an event that CCP launched, where basically the Legion was like a perfect ship for the combat part of it because of the nature of the rats that they were facing, or that we were facing in there. And so this had a big run up with increased volumes. That's predictable, but that's also in a sense just a CCP one-off. So maybe we can kind of disregard this one. Volumes seem to be up a little bit in the last couple of months or so for the Legion, but in general I'm not seeing too much happening in the volumes. Then here we've got the Loki. What's super noticeable for the Loki is how much more stable this ship has become. First part of the chart, we get a range of, what would this be, 160 to 250 million ISK. Second part of the chart, we're nicely in a 180 to 200 million range. Proteus, kind of the same thing, although it's more in the middle of the chart that we get this volatility from a 150 low point to a 230 high point, and we're slowly normalizing as well in a 180 to 200 million range. Did I forget? No, okay. And then we get the Tengu right here. That same thing had a July run up that was pretty big, probably due to the war, I'm going to say, where Tech 3 ships were probably used massively in nullsec. And then now we're quite nicely normalizing between a 180 and a 200 million ISK. So to me, of course, the one big difference, the one big change that has happened for the strategic cruiser markets is that you no longer lose skill points when the ship is destroyed, which I think was a very big barrier for a lot of players to actually use this ship. What surprises me a little bit is, for instance, here on the Loki, volume wise, yeah, it's maybe a little bit more, but it's not that noticeable. Proteus still below 50 a day being traded. That is not a lot. And even the Tengu kind of still at the same pace as it's always been throughout this entire year. It just stabilize the market quite a little bit. And I'm not sure if you guys remember, but a year ago I was completely against risking a lot of stuff in the tactical cruiser market, because it was small enough that it was quite often manipulated, which brings these types of charts where you can bottom out to a 160 and then all of a sudden spike to 200, and on not that much in volume spike again to a 230. These were quite often manipulation attempts that brought a lot of volatility and unpredictability in the market. If we disregard this one spike here due to a CCP event, I do think that except for this Legion chart, basically everything else has normalized quite nicely. The Loki, you're usually, you're trying to buy for around the 180, you're trying to sell for around 200. There's more predictability here. So honestly, if a chart would ever drop below 180, for me that would be a reasonable jumping point. The Proteus, kind of same story, except its bottom is 160. Clearly it's the least popular Tech 3 cruiser, and then its high point is closer to a 190 million range. And then here we've got the Tengu, which again here bottoms out at 180, mostly actually stabilizes between 190 and 200 million is, but you know exactly what you can expect from, like, let's say the last 4 or to 5 months for these strategic cruisers markets. And while it is probably going to mean potentially a lot less in profit, because obviously we would love to buy at 180 and then sell at 250 or buy below 180 here and then sell above 230, it does mean that things are more predictable. And thus when a chart bottoms like this here, for instance, for the Loki, I do think that I would be more confident in saying, yeah, this is the time perhaps to buy a hull and then wait for the recovery and then sell the chart. So these have been, in my opinion, way less manipulated, not necessarily because of the volumes, but perhaps there is now enough usage that there's always going to be enough players that will pay attention to those really bad bottoms, and that there's maybe even enough patience out there that these big spikes won't materialize, or that they're perhaps more risky. If more players are actually holding these types of ships, it's going to be even harder for someone to manipulate and then to be able to sell at the top, which is of course always the idea of the person that's manipulating the market. I'm not really sure, again, just like with the destroyers, if that's really the reason for the change, but it's pretty obvious that this market is behaving quite differently from before. And then to honor the request, let's also take a look at the subsystems. We'll try to go through these. Let's start at the bottom for once. Here is the Minmatar. So here are the core subsystems. Definitely a December spike here as well. That has gone up to 30 mil, or gone back down to 30 million ISK, which is the price for the last half year. So we do have something similar to the hulls here, or to the destroyer hulls I should say, where the first part of the year is spent 20 to 30 million ISK, and then we spend most of the second part of the year above 30 million ISK. Very clearly, in my opinion, a change that will be because we have more usage. Here volumes are up as well, because of course that skill point loss, that's no longer in the game. The dissolution sequencer, no spike here and staying below 30 million, so probably less popular than the augmented nuclear reactor. And then the immobility drivers, that's one is above 30 but started a little bit early on this as well, and no super noticeable price spike on this one either. So that's all right, it's one of them that clearly spiked. Next up, we've got the defensive covert configuration, spikes up to 60 million on a couple of daily averages, has quite a bit of volatility, and is clearly again more expensive than it was a year ago. Volumes as well, look at that, half the chart, and then we start to go well above 100 quite often, where before we just couldn't really reach those types of volumes. Adaptive defense node, look at these volumes here again, and a big spike in mid-December. So it's gonna be the same story. That does mean, I think, that just more players are having these Tech 3 ships, and thus these subsystems as well. That means that while things have become more expensive over the last year, they are at the same time a little bit more stable as well. So next up here, same story again, right? Start with the launcher efficiency configuration, starts below 30 million, now costing almost 40 million ISK. You can see the change right here happening in the volumes. Project scope, scoping array. Don't see the volume change price-wise from just below 30 to just above 30 million. So it's clear as well that there are still some subsystems that are way less popular than some of the others. And let's take a look at the support processor. Yeah, that one a little bit more in volumes, but at the tail end, we're still at 30 million. So I would say this launcher efficiency configuration is clearly the most popular one at the moment. And then we get our propulsion subsystems that also have a mid-December spike is normalizing or is retreating back to, well, still a pretty expensive price, just below 35 million. And again, look at the start of the year, 25 million. These are the volumes. And then we get our spike on the change. Presumably, I'm not entirely sure, but it's pretty much the only explanation that I have that this happens here then in August, where they are removing that skill point loss to these Tech 3 ships, and then you can see the volumes pick up and thus these higher prices. I would say that these interdiction, all of these modules have responded a lot more, at least the popular ones, to the change that CCP has done, and the hulls have basically stabilized at those new ranges. And then the wake limiter, also a little bit less popular, but still way more expensive. And again, look at the usage, look at the volumes. This one, the least popular one yet again. All right, we'll quickly go through the Galente one here as well, see if we notice something similar. Augmented fusion reactor, a little bit more expensive, not that noticeable in the volumes. Then we get the electronic efficacy gate, not great. And then we have our frictional extension processor. That's a little bit more expensive and volume-wise a little bit more, but not that much. That's definitely interesting, a completely different dynamic from the Minmatar subsystems. But this is of course the Proteus, which we saw is the least popular one, traded hull-wise less than 50 a day. So this one will perhaps have a couple of, yeah, not even that here, defensive covert reconfiguration. You'd think that that one is pretty popular. A little bit more expensive, just below 40, spent most of the time at 40 million, but the volumes are not noticeably higher. The augmented plating, yeah, just below 15 million, going for 15 million. The Nanobot Injector, actually down in price from a year ago, slightly more volumes, but nothing all too special. Really does show how much the Proteus is struggling at the moment. The drone synthesizer, yeah, up a little bit, but even that is not like a very big change. The hybrid encoding platform is up from 25 to 30 million, volumes up a little bit. And then we have our support processor that is more expensive, but is clearly not as popular a subsystem. Hyperspatial optimizer, yeah, not noticing too much here, not noticing too much here. And this one is actually pretty expensive at the moment. Not sure why this December run-up would have come in here, but perhaps tied to the event again. But all in all, the Galente subsystems are clearly not that expensive. If you want the cheapest Tech 3 option, it is quite clearly the Proteus and the Galente option. Let's go over the Caldari ones and see what's happening here. A little bit more noticeable on this augmented graviton reactor, a little bit more in volumes, especially at the tail end, and then the price response is that we're paying 40 million at the moment. We were below 30 million at the start of the year, and of course always this July-August spike on the change coming into the game. Electronic efficiency is pretty flat, so not as popular, and then the obfuscation manifold. A different dynamic for the first time. We actually have a cheap one. This one is going for less than 20 million ISK. Volumes are not great, so I'm going to assume that the graviton reactor is the most popular one. Let's see what happens with the defensive subsystem, covert reconfiguration. A little bit more volatility, but again, July we get the spike, and volume wise you get a little bit more, but it's not too crazy. The amplification node, couple of spikes, volume-wise nothing too crazy. And then the supplemental screening, also surprisingly stable. Interesting. I thought we would see more of a move here. Let's go over the offensive subsystem. Acceleration ejection bay is clearly more expensive, but the volumes are not noticeably higher. Magnetic infusion bay, a little bit more expensive, volumes are actually down. And then the support processor, a little bit more expensive, but nothing too special on the volumes. This is not what I expected. I'll be honest, I thought that we would see substantially higher volumes in the Tengu subsystems as well. But it looks like this one, because it is that PvE niche platform, right? If you want to take 3 ship that you're saying, what are you going to use in PvE? I think most people would mention the Tengu as their first choice. That means it has this inherent stronger demand that will have stabilized this right from the get-go. So the chassis optimization, spiking in price, volumes are up on this one, but not as noticeable as what happened in the Minmatar version. Then the fuel catalyst, more expensive, volumes are pretty steady, and the interdiction nullifier, surprisingly enough, is still at the same price it was a year ago. And look at those volumes, they have actually gone down. I think that speaks a lot to the PvE nature of a lot of the Tengu usage. And then for Amar, I think I did check that one in an Eve talk not that long ago. And so here we get again our August spike with quite a nice sustain for a full month above 40 million ISK. And our December spike, which is explained by the event. Volume wise, yeah, we're definitely up for the event, but in general, we're actually not up that much. The dissolution sequencer, we do have that increased price that's quite substantial. And the first one here that preempted somehow what was going to happen in May. This one shot up to 25 million and is basically still there. And then the parasitic complex, a little bit more volatility, definitely higher prices. Volumes are up a bit, but not that much. For the defensive subsystems, the covert configuration, volumes are up, but price is not that crazy. It was already more expensive than most of the others though, at almost 40 million ISK. Augmented plating is up substantially, even right now, selling for 55 million ISK for a subsystem. That's quite expensive. And then the Nanobot Injector, look at that volatility starting in September. That's quite substantial as well at 46 million. I think the dynamic here, let me know in the comments again what you think, is that perhaps the Legion and its subsystems especially is starting to sometimes run into production and availability problems, because that is a lot of volatility, and a range from 30 million up to 55 million is quite a lot for a subsystem. Then our Amar offensive one, yeah, the more expensive, higher volumes is clearly here with assault optimization and spiking at the moment as well. Liquid crystal magnifiers, volumes for the event, looks like, yeah, lasers, I think, made a lot of sense in the event. So this is an event related spike, clearly we're more expensive yet again. And then the support processor, nothing on the volumes, but the price again has gone up. And then for the propulsion ones, we'll take a quick look at this. A bit more usage. Interdiction nullifier seeing a late spike. And surprisingly enough, starting from a very reasonable price between 25 and 30 million ISK. Yeah, again, my read on this one is that we're probably just lacking. That's not lacking. It is coming back down to 34 though. So not sure. How the hell do you spike that up to 45 million? Despite the fact that it feels like it's... yeah, no, it's not that available. The volumes aren't that big. And then the wake limiter, same story, a little bit more volume, and all of a sudden price responds very, very violently, which may all be tied to, of course, to what happened with the event. Maybe there's more legions flying around that are trying different configurations, and even the purchase of 10, 20 of these subsystems seems to have a pretty sharp impact on these Amar propulsion subsystem markets and the Amar one in general. So that's interesting. Definitely a lot more diverse than what I expected. The Minmatar one clearly have a lot more volumes and are way more expensive, but seems to have gained a little bit in stability. And the Galente ones are just not popular. Yeah, that's unfortunate, since I'm a Galente character myself, but the Proteus is not doing too well. Caldari, more expensive, but more stable as well because of its PvE nature, I think. And then if you're looking for that volatility and for potentially, of course, then those profits, keep a close eye on what's happening with the Legion. It's not just here, it is also in the hull prices. That clearly the Legion has a lot of volatility it seems to have these niche uses that still does make it very attractive at certain times. That's pretty damn obvious. And yeah, there we go, guys. That's a look at the Tech Tree ship markets and at the subsystems. Very, very interesting. I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it, but I would say, I dare to say that where a year ago I would have said if you want to trade in the destroyer market, I do think at this point I would almost say if you want to trade, and especially if you want to have a little bit of a chance to do so quickly, then the cruiser market may actually be your better option at this point. That's it for this one. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.